And like they're like, we're gonna do this. And if I'm a grown up, if I'm Captain America, I go, hey Tony, he was brainwashed and kept frozen. There's 7 other guys like him who have been brainwashed that are about to get unleashed. If you want, we can imprison him, but we need to team up and go stop those guys. Then we'll work this out. There you go, no fight. But instead, no, you've got Iron Man just under ruse, and then they all punch each other. And then during this big fight scene, they're like, we're still friends, right? It's like, well, then why the hell am I watching this? And I don't mean to be a buzzkill.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that about that scene. Like you said, everybody thought it made such a big deal out of it because it was like, oh, they're all together, and I just thought it was like doing it for the sake of doing it, almost in a way. And there were so many characters flying around in there that I was like, what the hell? I couldn't even tell them apart at some points at all. Like when they're chasing, leading up to that fight scene, I'm like, who am I watching? What is going on? And
you got superhero fatigue in one scene.
Yeah, I did. And then the Spider-Man kid. I mean, that was just weird. Like they shoehorned that into the movie.
Absolutely.
It was so obviously like just out of left field, jamming it into the movie just to set up the new Spider-Man series. And the thing with the Spider-Man, I just saw it a second time because I saw it for free the first time. I'm a critic, but I went for like $2, and a friend wanted to go. I thought, why not? And I think it's a fun movie. I gave it a good review the first time, but it really is like the same thing as Thor. Everything's a joke. There's the only thing that worked about that movie, actually, what I thought was grounded that one was that Michael Keaton, I think, was either the best or one of the best Marvel villains because his character was somebody you could actually care about, I thought. And I loved the scene where they do the big reveal that he's, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the $400 million grossing Spider-Man, that he's the father of the girl that Spider-Man is in love with or an interest with. And I thought that was a great scene. The showdown between Keaton and the kid was amazing, I thought. And I loved Keaton's, that he was like this working man that you could empathize with, that he got screwed by the system.
By Tony Stark, the worst character in Marvel.
Okay, if we're switching to Spider-Man, I have to say, first off, he is like my favorite superhero, but I thought that movie was so bad. He was like the whiniest little kid. I just wanted to shut him up. I was like, enough already. And I thought that some of these things were so with symbolism and heavy-handed, and like I can't remember Zendaya's character's name. She's not Mary Jane.
She is.
Isn't she a different love interest?
No,
too, right?
because at the end she's everyone calls me MJ.
Okay. So they were at the Washington Monument, and she makes a comment that she's not going to go up because it was built by slaves. And I feel like this is like the Washington Monument, and this is where we're going to take our political stand. That she's not going up. Like that's like what else are you not going to go see the White House? Like I appreciate that end of things, of course, but I just felt like that was throwing it into like, let's be weirdly political.
Well,
at this
Thor
point.
Ragnarok had that in it. See, that's something interesting. Thor Ragnarok has this whole like B storyline of Cate Blanchett's character saying he's denying how this empire was really built, and I was like, ooh, okay. Like maybe they were just setting us up to go somewhere, but no. At the end, they're just like, no, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Right? They did veer away from that. You're right. They were setting that up as something big, and that didn't materialize.
What I will say about the Spider-Man that just came out, I accidentally saw it, and because I totally gave up on Marvel after the 2-punch of Ant-Man and Civil War, but at least that movie was the first Marvel movie that openly was like, this is for 10-year-olds. Like, we made this movie for little kids. This is for kids. And I also think that the end of that movie, how like not only is the climax of the movie him trying to stop Vulture from killing himself, but that he is not only successful, but then Vulture respects him for that. You know what I mean?
I feel like I don't even remember. I think I blanked it out.
Well, but the reason why I like that so much is because I'm really sick and tired of Marvel too. They just kill so many people in their movies anymore, and it really bothers me. It really bothers me how many people, like in Thor Ragnarok, there's a sequence with Cate Blanchett where she kills all of the Asgardian army, like one by one, and like that's like 300 people we just watched get killed. And yes, she's the bad guy and whatever, but it's like that's a bit extreme.
I felt like that was just supposed to be our reboot. that they're rebooting the franchise within the franchise. Like they're rebooting within number 3 as opposed to starting with like 1A again. Because you're right. I mean, not only did she kill everyone, and a lot of people were like, we didn't even know, but she killed, what was it? I think there were 3 or 4 that were the main ones who have been in the other movies. So I feel like more than the 300 by killing those like 4, that's where it was like, okay, we're wiping the slate clean and starting again. Because you're right. And so many things happened to Thor. I guess you can look at it as we're starting again. New hair, new eye, new everything. But why did they get rid of his hair and his eye? I don't know.
They got rid of his hair because Chris Hemsworth was tired of having long hair.
Yeah,
like, that's the problem.
I know.
You know, the same thing, one of the problems is that the stars are taking over the franchise, which is what happens to every good, like, TV show. Like, you look at The Office, and once the contracts had to be renewed, suddenly every actor on the show was a producer as well. Mm-hmm. And, you know what I mean? It just became this muddied mess, and I think the same thing's happening with the Marvel movies. But again, if you're going to... When the Marvel movies first came around, they were unique in that these movies shouldn't work. You've got Iron Man is an arms dealer, you know what I mean? And no one cares about this character, Iron Man. Captain America, this is post 9/11 America. Nobody's buying American patriotism anymore. And Thor, self-explained. Nobody gives a shit about Thor. But what blew me away about all 3 of those movies was that the filmmakers legitimized these things that shouldn't work without compromising who they were as characters. Captain America in 2011 should not work. It shouldn't work, you know what I mean? Without changing who he is. But no, they somehow managed to brilliantly bring Captain America to a modern audience. You know what I mean? And Thor the same way. Like they hired a real filmmaker who took this seriously and knew how to bring that to life, to legitimize these franchises. And now they're taking just the easy way out. Like they're just like, oh, it's stupid. Ha 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 ha. Like, cut his hair.
I think
Stan Lee cut his hair.
Right. And I think, though, what it is, not to make it at all a Marvel DC discussion, because I do not feel passionately like you guys do about either universe more than the other, but I think what it is for Marvel, at least, where I think that they were able to start especially strong, is that they had this vision, and they were willing to wait and go along with it and know that there might be some ups and downs, but they're willing to put in the time. I remember I was at the crew screening of Avengers. I know a lot of people who worked on it, and they all got, all the executives were up there saying thanks for hanging in for our vision and all this, because other studios don't have that. There are too many people they have to answer to. There's too much of a history. They can't just up and decide, okay, we're going to focus on these movies and go with it no matter what, and trust that 15 movies down the line we're still going to be making successful movies with these characters. And so I think that's something that set them apart from the beginning. And granted, if Iron Man hadn't been good, we might be in a totally different spot, but they really put that effort in, and I think drew in people who weren't into superheroes or who weren't into that character, or didn't know about that character, and thought hey, this is fun. Right,
but they hired real directors to do that, like Joe Johnston and Kenneth Branagh and even Jon Favreau. You know what I mean? These directors who have strength and a unique voice and vision. Mm-hmm. And then after that, they started giving Game of Thrones directors chances and stuff like that. And you think, oh, they're still rolling with this idea of giving these directors you don't expect, chances. But no, what you slowly realize is oh, those are the people they have control over.
And and then with the new one, they picked this guy. I'm not sure if it's pronounced this way.
Taika Waititi.
Okay, there you go. I was going to say.
Got you there.
No, because I almost said it in a way that would have sounded like we needed a PG-13 rating or something.
Butthead.
The guy. He's from What We Do in the Shadows and The Wilder People, right? And so it's they're it's an interesting choice. But when I heard that before going in, I was like, how's this guy qualified to make a legit superhero movie? And I think that's part of the problem, that those movies were so jokey that this became a joke because of him in a lot of ways.
Well, that's a whole nother... That could be a whole episode on its own, this idea of pulling directors out of the indie world and giving them Jurassic World as their first studio movie. But
Jurassic World.
I love Jurassic World.
God.
Oh, yeah, no way.
Jurassic World was...
Why?
That movie was so bad, my friend Will, when we saw it in the theater together, we were seeing it in 3D at the Chinese theater.
So did I.
When Blue, the little raptor, came out to help at the end, end, Will was so annoyed he took off his 3D glasses and threw them at the screen and watched the rest of the movie without them on because it was so bad.
I kept hearing that movie was good, and so I had high expectations, and I was like, what is this that I'm watching?
I loved it.
Very rarely can you tell from someone's costume that it's not going to be a good movie. And you see those costumes and you go, that doesn't look right. She literally runs from a T-Rex in high heels, and then to rub salt in the wound, insult to injury, they do a close-up of her high heels as she's running from a T-Rex.
Right. It is so funny you say that about the costumes, because right now I'm working on an article for Variety, so I can't talk too much about it, but I am interviewing a lot of prop masters, and one of the things that one of the prop masters mentioned, which is right in line with that, is saying that a lot of times they feel like props and set deck can sell a movie just from the still, because early on when the movie studio is putting out photos of the film and trying to promote it, you see a photo, and if people feel like something doesn't fit for whatever reason, even if it's your subconscious, then automatically you start thinking, okay, I'm not into this movie, it doesn't look right. So it's really funny that you bring that up, because this was just occurred in an interview that I did yesterday, so that's fresh on my mind, and I hadn't thought of it exactly like that before, that maybe from just one still I'd be sold or not. But yes, it must be something about that subconscious. But I agree. Why was she running in high heels that whole movie?
Yeah, that movie, we can't even talk about that movie anymore. We can bring it back with Chris Pratt was also in Guardians of the Galaxy, which that was the last... Guardians of the Galaxy was the last Disney Marvel movie that came out that really got people excited, where they were like, "Ooh, this is new and fresh and original." And me being a big Chris Pratt fan, I was like, "Okay, cool, let's check this movie out." And I also love James Gunn. I thought Super and Slither and all of his movies are just gems. I go to see this movie and it looked kind of neat, but it was a nothing movie.
And see, that one I have to sit out the discussion on, because I didn't see that. I was in a combination of superhero fatigue and all these sort of sci-fi type fantasy, I guess more fantasy type characters.
Right.
And I'm not into the fantasy genre, which surprises me sometimes based on the other things that I like in general. But it just did not appeal to me. And I keep hearing how great it was. And I feel like if I went back and watched it, maybe I'd be really into it. But lately, I kind of feel like every time I go back and watch movies that people are really into, I like Jurassic World, like that first Thor, I just wind up a little bit disappointed.
Well, I think we're disappointed because, okay, so Carl likes to talk about the difference between DC and Marvel, as everyone does, how DC is the more serious ones and Marvel the more fun ones, you know what I mean? That's the vocabulary that's been created. And there was one reviewer, I forget who it was, but he had a cool quote about when Batman vs. Superman came out, and he was like, Warner Brothers, Disney built their empire on family fodder and cartoons and stuff. And Warner Brothers built their empire on noirs and melodramas, so it makes a lot more sense that Warner Brothers having the DCU would keep their things on the decidedly darker side of the street. And I remember when Batman vs. Superman came out, which for the record I absolutely love. When that came out, I remember some criticisms people have is that why does it have to be so depressing? Why is it so downbeat? Why isn't it funny? First of all, I did think it was funny. I thought there was a lot of good wit in it. His mom and Alfred, they were nice little... but I think that Marvel is slowly showing its true colors, which is that, a great idea that they had at the beginning to create this cinematic universe, it's a great idea. But after a while, that machine kind of runs out, and now everything that comes out from them, whether it's Thor Ragnarok, Guardians of the Galaxy, or Ant-Man, is literally just in service of what's next. Right. And those first three, technically Iron Man 2 came out before, Captain America, but you get what I mean. The Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, they were their own things. They existed in their own worlds. And I think that's a problem that Marvel has gotten themselves into as well. They created this cinematic universe, but they feel like everything has to interact with each other. You've got filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, who he has a cinematic universe. You know what I mean? Where Pulp Fiction exists in the same world as Jackie Brown and, yada, yada, yada. And that's fun. It's fun to go to those movies and be involved in a franchise like that. But it's also, they're their own things. So...
And I think where that works and doesn't work also is that they can draw more people in, which I guess is ironic since Marvel draws people in. But I think in worlds where they are connected but more tangentially, they can bring in new audiences in a way that doesn't feel like, oh, because I've missed the last one, I can't jump in now. type of thing. Whereas Marvel, you're right, because they are so interconnected. If you miss, and then they're in like threes. If you miss one, it's sort of like, I'm not going to jump in because now I'm already out of that. Or like you say, at the beginning of this one, there had to be that great recap because like I sat out number 2 because I was so turned off from, from superheroes and Thor. And so, you do need that a little bit because you're right. They're so interconnected that suddenly it's like, well, why have Hulk and Thor been missing?
Right. Well, that's